Welcome everyone to today's class. I'm very excited to have you all. Last week, I think we closed talking about use effect, which is one of React's famous hooks, right? So we talked about it extensively, even though I will not lie. Talking about use effect extensively was not part of our curriculum, right? But I needed to because I noticed that with the formal cohort, we didn't really treat use effect so in depth, and use effect is something that's very valuable, super valuable when it comes to working on React application, especially with regards to optimization and making sure that you don't have too many excessive re-renders, right? So I believe that we all we all enjoyed that class and we are pretty much grounded in that aspect, correct? Just comment in the text box quickly, please. So we move. All right. Okay. So I have a couple of yes, and then that means we are good to go. All right. So today we'll be talking about React forms, right? Forms in React. So basically, when we talk about forms in React, forms are like crucial parts of any user interface, right? They allow users to interact with your app. Basically, you are trying to, forms are like utilized to get information from your users. So your users can easily provide information to you, utilizing forms, request for something, utilizing forms. So you can think of forms like the way users talk to your app, okay? So apart from buttons, clicking on buttons, next, like when I'm clicking on buttons, I'm talking about uh, uh, actions, like taking those button actions to move to next pages. Okay, you're clicking on About Us page, you want to see About Us page. Those kind of actions are also very valuable, right? But when we are talking about forms are like a means for your users to communicate directly with your application. So you're like, if your users have information that they want to send to you, you utilize form to receive those informations while your users utilize forms to send those informations, right? Uh, in React, handling forms involves managing input data, right? So I believe that I shouldn't explain what uh, input tags are in this class because this is intermediate, right? So I believe that we have all worked with input classes, input tags, like the input text area and a couple of others, okay? But basically, we'll just see how we can incorporate those things into forms, right? In React, those tags into forms in React, okay? So firstly, we have controlled components and we have uncontrolled components, but we're going to pick controlled components first. So basically, in controlled components, React is in charge of managing the states of those components. Okay, so when I say components, we are actually talking about the input fields. Okay, those input fields are actually components. So when we talk about React controlled components, basically React handles the changes that happens in those components. So everything is handled by React. So you as a developer, all you need to do is hand over those things to React. So let's go ahead and look at what that looks, see what that looks like in actual code. Okay. So let's bring our, pardon me, my browser seems to be misbehaving. Okay. Okay, so I would like you guys to give me 2 minutes. I believe I have some technical issues. My power just went out. Okay. Are we together? Can we hear me? Can everyone hear me? Okay, just 2 minutes, okay? Okay, all right. So yeah, I believe we are back. We're back. So let's carry on. So basically what we'll do is we'll create a component that we will utilize as our form component, okay? So since we have dashboard already, let's create something that we can, so let's create a component that we can display in our outlet, okay? So let's call it control form. Control form dot JSX. Okay. All right, so we have our control form initialized. So for this control form, first thing we want to create a state, right? And call it, that state is going to control our name, not form. So there was a set name, and then we can do this. So I remember this was confusing for a lot of people, so we're going to just import use state instead, okay? So now that we have this in place, we can now go ahead and figure out, set up our form, right? So let's say for the form, we want to have a form input field, right, to define our form. Then within that form input field, we want to create first the label input, label tag. Now, what does this label do? This label is supposed to label our input, right? Our input field, so that when we create our input field, we have a label for it. So we'll call this label name, okay? Then we create our input field now. Then for this input field, we'll give you the type of type of text. And then we want to call the value name. And then we want to add an unchange effect to it. Now for our unchange effect, we want to pass a handle change function to it. Okay, so basically we have created number one. Hold on, guys, let me close this. All right, so basically what we've done now is we have our state created, right? If you notice, we are passing our state as the value of this component, of this input component, okay? So the value is name, right? Basically, all we want to do is set name, right? I believe we understand this already. We understand how to set name, what we are doing when we try to manipulate the state. We understand what happens there. So we'll create a function called handle change. And for that function, we want to set name to the value of whatever is put into, to the value of the target in that input field. Okay? Good. So now we have, sorry, handle change. Okay, I think we have bad spelling here for change. So let's use this. Okay. So now that we have created this function, we want to control the changes that are happening inside this input field. So whatever changes happen in this input field, we want to utilize this function to control the changes. So what are those changes that will happen? Probably changes in the text that we are inputting into this input field, right? So we want to pass that text to update this name field or this name state, okay? So when we do this, this is like a very simple form that we've created, okay? We can add like an on submit button. So for this button, we want to give it the type of submit. And then we want to give it the text of submit, okay? So we are submitting this button, and then the idea is this button should be inside the form. Please don't get that right, okay? So this button should be inside the form. So basically now, if we save this and then import this and add it to where we are importing other components. So where do we have our main routing? Here. So if we come here and we create a new route and call it control form, so the path will be control form, and then we are adding control form as the component we want to display there. If we say, let's just add control form to the links too. And then let's utilize our route here. All right. Then we can close that. Okay. And call it forms. Okay. So if we save this, ideally, when we come to our browser, we should be able to link. We have wrong spelling somewhere. Forgive me. All right. So if we come here now, we should be able to come to forms and see our form. So basically our form did not display. So let's figure out why that happened, okay? So if we come back here, we have our label name, input text, blah, blah, blah. So why is the form not displayed?
Did we import it in the app.js?
Yeah, no, yeah, inside the app.js is imported, yeah. So here it is. Yeah, so don't worry, let's look at it holistically, okay? So we have our route implemented here, and within here, because the error is saying that no routes called controlled forms is available.
Okay, it's inside the dashboard.
Yeah, it's inside the dashboard. So it should be dashboard / control forms, correct?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So our route will be dashboard / control forms. So let's see how that works. Okay. So if we refresh this, let's go back to home and then we click on forms. Okay. So yeah, so we have our forms because initially we were targeting our forms via a weird link. Okay. So assuming we're handling this inside the dashboard here, are we following? All we would have done is just duplicate, just add the here since it's already nested, okay? But we were accessing it from our nav or from our app.jsx, which is like the main source of all our routing. So in that case, we needed to access it via the dashboard first before we can get to the forms itself, okay? So if we take these forms and then we add it here and call these forms, then we come back to our dashboard, we should be able to access forms from here, okay? Do we understand what happened there? Please, let's be fast with our response so that we can move quickly. Okay. Okay. All right, cool. All right. So basically now we have our form. We have an input, we have a label to know what we are meant to put inside here, code name, and then we have our button to submit the form, right? Now remember that every time you submit this form, because it has like a default behavior of refreshing the page. Okay. Every time you click on submit for this form, it must refresh this page. So to avoid that default behavior, let's get back to our form. To avoid that default behavior, we add e.prevent default. So what this line of code does is it prevents our form from refreshing the page. If we go back now and click on submit, it doesn't refresh the page again. Are you following? Are we good? All right, so I believe we are moving forward. So basically now we have our input field, and then we have our label, our input field, and we have a button to submit, correct? So now what happens here is, let's assume that we want to, when this handle submit is triggered, we want to do a particular action, okay? So we'll create a const of handle submit, and then for handle submit, we will now console.log the name that we are submitting. In fact, let's not use console.log. Let's use an alert, okay? So let's say alert submitted name, okay? So now we have this set name now. We'll get to that set name. So remember that initially we have an unchanged handler. We have an unchanged function that handles the actions that are being taken within this input field. Now we have a handle submit function to handle the actual submission of this form. Now, if you notice, I did not add this handle submit to the button component because this form as it is. So Chidi, I believe that that question that you just asked is really, really weird because we've handled state management like way back. And for everything we handle with regards to state management, we've always talked about the fact that this is a function that updates the states. So asking what set name is supposed to do now is really weird. Good, let's go on. So basically, what we are trying to do now is we want to now handle the submission of this form. But if you notice, when I created the submission function, I did not add it to the button, but the type of the button is submit. So now what you should understand is that as far as this form is written within this form component, okay, and you have defined an on-submit rule, that is, you have said on-submit should utilize this function to submit this form. Once you have this type of submit in your button, clicking on this button automatically submits this form. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. Please, I need yes, it does. Okay, so I need at least 5 people to say it makes sense so that I can move forward because I'm getting some questions that are getting me worried if people are actually following me. Can we go on? All right, so everybody's saying yes, so let's go on. So now, inside this, so I'm going to remove this from on change, okay? And this is actually valuable inside the handle submit function, okay? So now what I'm trying to say is, in this particular form, anytime this form is submitted, it should display an alert showing submitted name, and then you should show the name that was submitted in the input field, the name that was added to that input field. So in essence, what's going to happen is when I input a name into this input field, this handle change updates using set name. Using this set name, it updates this state, and potentially that means this state now will now carry the new name that I have inputted into this input field. So when I click on submit, it triggers this handle submit, and then it shows me this alert. Is there anywhere you people are not understanding this right now so that we can take it again if need be? Everybody clear on this? All right. So now, if you notice, I've added a set name, and I've added an empty string here. What I'm doing here is simple. I'm just simply saying, at the stage where this particular form has been successfully submitted and I've gotten this alert, I want to remove the name that I inputted initially. So in that case, the same thing that this handle change function is doing here, which is setting this name to the value that was inputted into this input field, I am saying that remove that particular value and keep it empty so that I can put in another value if I want to. So in this case now, when we come to our browser, right, we see that we have name, the label, we have the input field, and we have submit. So if I click on the input field and I input a name, say Dave, and click on submit, we should get an alert that shows my name, submitted name. So if you notice, this submitted name is not showing any value, correct? Are we together? The submitted name is not showing any value. So now we need to figure out why that is happening. So let's first of all console log our value. Console.log our value of name. Okay? Name. So if we save this, let's see what we have in our console. So if I submit console is empty to show that something is not actually working. Okay, so let's look at our function again. So we have set name of e.target.value. Okay, and then we have our submit, right? All set up. So basically what's going on here is the fact that, yes, basically we've not put in a value yet, but it should still work, right? So let's change this, okay? So let's use backticks here. Let's use template literals, okay? To handle what is going on here. So we'll remove this, and then we'll put this in a curly braces and add the dollar sign, okay? All right, so then e.target.forms, then control form, and handle change, e.target.value, okay? And e.target.value, have handle change, which is going to be the value, okay? All right. And then a value of name. Okay. So let's go ahead and and try this again, okay? So let's say I input Dave, and then I click on submit. Good. So now you can see that we have Dave in printing on our submit function. So let's remove the comma that we have here. Okay. All right. So if we come here, we have Dave now printed here. So if I put Udo, it will change to Udo. And you can see that our console.log is also printing Udo. And for every letter that I change inside this control.log, because that unchanged feature records every time that we click, every time that we add a new value to the input field, you see that it is recording it as we add the value. You see there's U when I added U, and there's U, and then there's UD, and then there's UDO, right? So for every value that we're adding into the input field, it's being recorded. The state is changing because we are utilizing this set name to handle that change. So we are targeting the element, and then we are checking what is being added to that target element. We want the value of that target element. So that's what we are doing here. That value is what we are adding to set name, and that set name potentially updates this name value. Okay. Now, what we're having in the console is this console.log that we created here. So I can remove this, and let's just have only the alerts that we have inside our handle submit. So we can actually decide to do this, handle this handle submit no matter how we want to. We can remove this. So let's say we remove this and we go ahead and make changes to our input field, okay? So let's refresh this, and then let me add Josh to our input field. So if you notice, when we click on submit, it submits Josh, okay? Now, after submitting Josh, if we close this input field, you notice that Josh is still inside the input field. That is because now we have set that state, the new state, this state, set name, we have set this state to Josh. And if we don't clear that Josh, Josh will not change in this place. So we can manually clear Josh here, right? But that's not good for UX, okay? So we can say Frank, it's not good for UX. Yes, it's going to change the state of this component and show Frank, but Frank will stay there, okay? But if we now add this set state to an empty array, we're now saying, okay, immediately after this handle submit is successful, so immediately it has done this action, prevented default, shown the alert to tell the user that this submission was actually, or it actually happened, right? Then remove the content of that input field, okay? So now what happens is when you come here and we do the same thing, if I put Frank and I submit, the input field clears, as you can see. It clears automatically. So I can come here and put Dave now and submit. Now, what you need to understand is at this stage, let us return our console.log for the states, for the name states. Okay, now, good. So let's look at what happens when we change the name. So let's say Frank, okay, and then we submit. Remember that the state is being represented here at the moment. If we click on OK, you notice that the state has cleared. It is empty now. So it returns to the default state until we add another name. Okay? Until we add another name, say Greg. And that state is updated. We submit this again and that state will clear. So do we understand why we clear the state of the input field? Basically for UX reasons. Do we understand that? Can we move forward? Yes, so this is, yeah. So basically this is a simple way to understand or to utilize controlled components. So basically, React is controlling the component with this state management. Now, remember that you can actually utilize uh, context to handle your state depending on the kind of form you are creating. So let's assume that maybe you are creating like a multi-page form where people input their basic details on a page, then they need to go to the next page and input another detail. But you don't want to use one use state to handle it. You can create a context like we did um, for our protected routes, right? So you can create a context, have a custom hook that you can utilize to share states with all your form components. It's one form, but you are sharing all your states, you are getting all your form data using like a universal listen. We are going to look at it in depth when we actually work on context, okay? But this like utilizing use state to define the basic form and have your state managed within your form, okay? So let's look at uncontrolled components, right? So for uncontrolled components, the DOM is in charge, basically. So remember that for controlled form components, React is in charge. But for uncontrolled components, that is for form input fields that are not being controlled by React, the DOM is in charge in those kind of cases, okay? So let's say uncontrolled component leaves the input in the hands of the DOM. So what we use to control that is ref. So there's something called useRef. It's also a hook, right? So for useRef, what you are using useRef to do is to grab the reference. It's like referencing a particular tag. So I believe there's some, let me use JavaScript to describe what referencing looks like, okay? So basically, when you are working with JavaScript and your HTML, and then you want to like utilize a particular input tag, right? Or a particular tag in your HTML, but you want to add some JavaScript behavior to it, right? You are either referencing that tag based on its ID or based on its class name. Correct? Please comment in the text boxes if that's what you understand, okay? Correct? So there has to be some sort of reference for you to connect your JavaScript or your actions or functions in your JavaScript to what happens in your HTML. I need more people to respond. We are very many in this class. I don't like the idea of one person responding. Okay, so basically that's like what you should understand with regards to useref, okay? So what useref does is, useref is like you are using it to target a particular input field, and then you are taking that value based on the ref or based on the reference. So you are saying, for this very value, I want to pick the ref, like this, I want to reference this input field and take the value from it. Are we together? So the first step will be to import useref, right, from React. So it's a React hook. So the first step will be to import useref from React, then create a ref. So let's say we want to have const input ref, right? And let's just remove this null from the initial value, okay? Okay. So we have our ref initialized, okay? So now we have use ref. This ref now is what we want to use to reference our input field, okay? So if we come down to the input field, let's just duplicate this for the purpose of those who are still utilizing what we are doing on this file. So let's just duplicate it and work with ref here. So now instead of having a handle change function, what I will now have here is a ref. So all I need to do is reference that particular use ref that input ref that was created, right? So I can say for this ref, I want to reference it to input ref. So let's just pick that up here to avoid typo errors and place it here and cover. Okay. So now basically what we've just done here, right, is remove all the control that React had on this input field. Okay. So now if you want to access this input field, this input content now, we will now go to, instead of having this set name and all this, we want to alert what happens when we submit after having an input in that particular input field, right? So let's say an alert to say, remove this, to say submit name. But in this case now, we'll not be putting submit name because we are not using this state anymore. We are now picking the ref. So what we are going to do in this case now is we are going to add the ref, and then we are going to access the current value. We are going to access the current value of this ref. So you can see we have our input ref, which we created, input ref. Then now inside the handle sum, we want to say when this is submitted, check the value of this ref that was created, and then add it to this alert and show submitted name, right? Now, we're going to remove this too from this function. So I'm not deleting it. Like, we all know why I'm not deleting it, because I know that sometimes you know will tell me to go back to so page for her to see what we've done there. So I believe a lot of you are trying to follow up on what we're doing. So I'm keeping code for you. Okay. So in this scenario now, we have created the ref, accessed that ref in our handle submit function. Notice that we are still using our handle submit because this is still a form, and we still want to trigger the submission based on the on submit rule. Okay. So now if we go to our browser, let's just refresh this so that we can refresh console. And then we decide to add a name like Dave to the input field, and then we submit. As you can see, Dave still displays on the browser. Now we can also we can check the ref by doing a console.log that ref. So basically, if we come to our browser, we should see, so we cannot access that ref. We have to access the current value of the ref. Current.value of that ref. Okay. Good. So as you can see now that we have accessed the current value of the ref, and the current value of the ref is Dave. Are we together? Do we understand what's going on here? Is anybody lost? Please don't hesitate. Don't be shy. Just let me know. All right. So we are all following. Okay. That's actually okay. So Emmanuel, I think your hand is up. So let's hear from you. Where are you lost, and what will you need clarification for?
Thank you, sir. I think the use ref of 18. Can you please explain how? Okay, can you hear me? All right. Okay. Please, can you re-explain how the function that's and I don't know if you can calm down a little bit. Okay, we are no longer using state again. So can you explain how the function the undo click function and the use ref, how they actually go hand in hand. Thank you.
Okay, that's actually a good question. So I'm happy that a lot of people understand it so far. So I'll just try again for the benefit of those who are shy and the fact that Emmanuel came up. So let's just look at it again. So basically, remember the fact that we have React hooks, correct? And for React hooks, use state, remember use state is also a hook, a React hook. We have use effect, which we treated last class, okay? Now we are talking about use ref. Now, what use ref does is like a storage, okay? But we are not storing random things in this case, or we are not setting things to states in this case. In essence, what we are trying to do is we are only assessing things based on the reference that we attach to them. Emmanuel, do you understand that? So basically what we are saying is
Yes,
for this
please.
input, so what we are saying is for this input field, we want to reference this input. This is a part of React input component, okay? So if you are not using controlled component, that is basically using use state to control your component, and you want to use uncontrolled method, this is already available for you. But for you to use this, you need to define a ref that you want to reference. So now this ref now is like taking all the functionalities of use ref to access this particular input component, pick the value, and then now provide the current value for you. So that is why when we do console.log, we did not console.log input ref. We console.log input ref, we check the current value of this input ref because we are saying we want to reference a particular input, and for every content that is put into that input, we want to store it in this input ref. So we want to store it as a value. If you remember when we were working with control value, remember that we were checking the element and then we were checking the target value. So we're saying for this element, what is the value inside that element? So we are targeting this element and we are picking the value from that element. In this case, that target is the current element, the current input field. So now we want to check that very input field, we want to check the value of it and then attach it to this ref. Now, the fact that we have already attached this ref to this input field means anything that happens in this input field is stored in this ref, is stored in this input ref. So when we come here, we can easily access the current value of this particular input field. So in essence, we come to our browser. If we come to our, we have control from value, line 7. Line 7. Current value. Okay, so let me. Okay, good. So I don't want people to be confused with what just happened here. What I did here is called optional chaining, okay? So we would talk about optional chaining eventually, but it's pretty much just preventing errors, okay? So in this case now, the error we're having with regards to what was happening here is the fact that this use ref had no value. There was no current, initially to have nothing in it. It will be use ref current dot value. We can add null. So null can also make sure that that error doesn't surface, right? Initially, but it still surfaced. So it cannot read value of 0. So let's remove null from here. So basically what we are trying to say is, what that error is trying to say is that it cannot access any current value in this input ref because nothing has been added to the input field at this stage. So for us to avoid that error, we do optional chaining. What optional chaining does is to prevent that error. So it's saying if this value is not available, don't throw an error. Wait and allow the value to load. Probably that value has not loaded yet, or it has not been inputted yet. Okay. So now with optional chaining, it prevents that error and allows our page to display. So that we can now, if you see here, you see that our console log is showing undefined. So nothing is defined in this ref at the moment, but if we come here and put Dave and submit, we can now have the value of Dave. So we still don't have the value of Dave in this ref, but we can access it over here. So let's figure that out. Also that log input ref. Value. Okay, so basically we're not displaying it using template literals. Okay, all right, so let's go on. So basically now we have our input ref.current.value and it is showing as David instead of undefined now because we have made inputs, right? If we clear this input and let's add David instead and submit, you should have a new value of David. So as you can see, this is not as efficient as using use states, right? But this should actually work. So let's refresh this and see what happens. We have value. And let's try again. All right, so let's say Dave, and then let's submit. So do we have console log? Our alert is showing, but our console log is not showing. So let's move this console log inside our block and then try it again. All right, so we can see our console log now. Okay, so basically what we've done now is utilize useRef to reference our input field, submit our form, and have this input field value pop. So assuming we had an API where we wanted to submit this input field to, we can easily just write our logic within this handle submit function and submit our code. Okay? Are we together? Yeah, so Yasira, basically, when you say instead of using local storage, you use ref. So ref will not persist. So basically, why do people use local storage? Because you want to persist data, right? And then there is database. So you want to persist your data. That means you want to have your data stored so that you can utilize it as you go on while using your application, correct? So using useRef is basically just to submit your form. After submitting your form, it doesn't really save your data that was submitted into any database or into any storage facility, okay? But if you use local storage now, you can utilize local storage to save that particular data that was inputted into the form. So after submission, you want to have that data saved to local storage. Maybe you want to access it somewhere else in your application during that person's session, right? You can definitely utilize local storage. But well, local storage has its own limitation too because it's session based. So for you to really persist that data, you require a database. That's where backend comes in. They create an API that helps you submit that form data to a particular database or to a particular backend that now processes that data and saves it to a database that you can access anytime, regardless of when the session was ended or when you started a session, or your device, whether you're using the same device to access that particular application or not. I hope that's clear. Yes, you're right. All right. So let's go ahead and look at handling multiple inputs fields, right? So let's say you want to have multiple input fields, okay? You can create a custom state for that, okay? So instead of having name, you can have form data, okay? And then for form data, you can say set form data. And then you create an initial state of name, email. So we are just going to use name and email for the purpose of this session, okay? All right, so we have defined an object, a user object here, okay? So we have defined a user object here, okay? Now, what happens in this user object is that when we want to update this form now, we will be accessing the form data based on, like we'll be trying to reference different elements within this object, correct? So with this now, if we come to our handle change, so let's say we come to our handle change and we want to handle our form data. We can start with spreading form data. We all understand what spreading is because these are things we did at the rudimentary level of this class, so that we don't get lost when we get to this stage, right? So first things first, we want to set the form data, okay? Now, for form data, remember that form data is an object, right? And then within this object, we want to spread the form data and then add our values as e.target dot value, okay? So we want to access each value and add it to our form, data, okay? So now we have this created. So this is our handle change, okay? Basically, what we are creating here is we are creating a controlled component, right? Remember, controlled component any use state, okay? So for this now, we come down here and inside our component. So let's utilize this again, okay? So we can now create we can create an extra component. And then for this component, we want to say, for type, we want to call it name. Forgive me. We want to name our component. So basically, this name value helps you identify your input component when working with multiple input values. Now, remember that you have name, you have email. So we are naming our first input, name. So in essence, we are saying we want this to update the name value of our form data, right? And then for value, we want to say the value should be form data, that is the present state of form data dot name. So we are accessing the name value of form data, which is this value of form data. Now we'll go ahead and add our unchanged. We've already defined our unchanged here. So in essence, because of this name value that we've added, when this unchanged is triggered, and this logic, that's this spread operation that is supposed to spread and add the value that is inputted to this form data, what happens is it picks the form value, it picks the value of name. So even if you input something into let's just add the other value so that we can utilize it to do what we have to do. So let's say form data dot email. Good. And then we will need to add the name value, the name property, and call it name. Okay, good. So now, no, this is email. Okay, good. So now, what we have done like this now is we have made these two input fields unique. Okay, we have made these two input fields unique. By doing that, we declared different names for each of them to make sure that we can identify them based on their names, correct? And now inside here, the name we are expecting is name and email. So in essence, when we are trying to attach values to our form data, we are looking at trying to attach value to our name and to our email, which is why when we access the form value, we are accessing the form data dot name value. Now, yeah, we can change that type to email. Thank you, Josh, for that. So now, when you look at the unchanged, you see that we are using the same unchanged function, right? But because of the dynamic nature of this name value, this unchanged effect, this unchanged function is going to be updating these values based on their names. So let's go ahead and work on our handle submit, okay, so that we can use it to submit our form. So I need to clear out this to give us a little bit more clarity on what we are doing. So we have name, and for name, we want to access it based on the form data. Remember that the state is the form data, right? The form data, and this time we are not checking value because it's not just one value in that form data. We are checking the name. We are checking the value of name in that form data. And then for email, we are checking the value of email in that form data. Or we want to display the value of email. So we are accessing form data dot email. And then we're also accessing form data dot name. So in essence, when you update this name, it should update only this based on the name. And then when you update the email input field, it should also update the email input field. And then when you submit, we should get an alert that shows name and email. And then it should show the actual name and email that was inputted into our form. So let's add a label for our email. Okay, so now we have name and we have email, right? So let's input. Do we have a console.log here? It's none for now. Okay, so let's just utilize the alert. So if I put David, so our input field doesn't seem to work, which means our unchanged effect is not working. So if our change effect is not working, we need to figure out what the issue is. Okay, so we come back to our component, right? Okay, so Yes, so you are correct. So I didn't even notice that. This is my good suggestion. Sometimes write what it wants. Okay, so yeah, so we are targeting it based on the name. Okay, so we are saying that we want to attach the value to the name or inside form data. So basically, we are saying whatever name is attached here, we should attach the value to that name, which is the issue we were facing before because we are attaching value to value. So there was no identification. Okay, thank you, George, for that observation. So if I put David now, it should show. So David, and then I put my email and I submit. We should get name David and email this. Okay. We can do this for as many, we can add as many uh, input values that we want, depending on what we want to submit to our endpoint or whatever purpose that we are trying to submit that form. Correct? Is that clear to everybody? Are you sure? Are we together? Okay. All right. So we can look at one more concept before we call it a day. Is that fine by everyone? Okay. So let's go ahead and look at give me a second. So let's look at form validations. Okay, so remember, so Emmanuel, I think basically what you need to do is watch our previous classes because we talked about spread. And if you understand what spread does, you will not ask that question, right? Because what you're doing with spread is you're trying to gather information and put it in one place. Okay, so the belief is that form data has information, and then we are trying to bring all data and put it inside form data. So what we do first is to open it up. Yeah, so initially we need to open the data. So once we open form data, which is an object, we open that object up and then we start adding things to that object, correct? So when we are trying to add things to that object, we have this is the key, this is the value. So we are saying when adding things to this form data, add it as a key value pair. So in essence, we are saying, make sure that the name is there. Put the name first, then attach that name to a value, right? So the name, if the name is name, inside form data, just like we have created here, see, name, email. So if the name is name, carry that value and create a name key and then give it the value of that name. That is the value that was added to the input field, right? So which input field is being accessed? Is it the name? If it is a name, attach the value that was added to that input field, to that name value, to that to that name. Good. And then likewise for email, when we actually access the email input field. So I think that's clear now. Any other person had issues with this?
I raised my hand. I don't know, maybe he's not looking.
Okay, that's Rahim. Yes, I didn't see that. Sorry. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Under the undo submit, yeah, the form data there is a question mark before dot name. Can you please walk me through what is the function of that dot?
So where is that?
Under
Where
the
is that?
undo submit form. Just scroll
Inside
down.
it.
No, undo submit.
Okay,
Down.
this one. This question
No,
mark.
below. Yeah. Alert
So
name.
So
Oh.
this is called data binding. That's a
Okay.
good question, actually. Thank you for asking that question. So this is called data binding. So in essence, we are trying to access a particular information. Okay. Now we have form data. Inside form data, remember form data is an object. Okay. So we want to access, number one, we want to see the name value that was added. And then number two, we want to see the email value, right? That's been saved to state, correct? So
Yes.
when we put this dot is saying inside this form data, we want to access name. So we say dot name. Then inside this form data, at this point, we want to access the email. Are you following? Now, when I put a question mark, I explained this question mark a few minutes ago when I said this is called optional chaining. I'm only saying at the point where this form data dot name does not have any value, that is, it is undefined. I don't want my code to throw any error. I want it to wait until this particular binding has data. Then it should display the data. So it should either display undefined or display the data, but it should not throw an error. That is why I'm now adding a question mark, which is what we call optional chaining. Do you understand that? Okay. Are you sure you do understand? All right, cool. Excellent. You can drop your hand. All right. So let's look at form validation, okay? Basic form validation. We'll look at some libraries for form handling and form validation later on as we go and start looking at more complex concepts. Okay. So for now, let's just take care of like the most basic stuff, and then we can see others later. All right. So what we want to do now is we want to handle errors. Okay. Basically, we want to be able to show a user an error if the user did not make an input in an input field and then clicks on the submit button. Okay. That makes sense. I believe most of you have encountered stuff like that, right? So a form is requesting for your name, email, and then probably phone number and some other stuff. And then you put your name and your email, you don't put the phone number, and then when you try to submit, it doesn't submit, it rather shows you an error. Yeah, so that's form validation, basically. So it's like a way of making sure that if you have compulsory fields in your form that require people to make inputs to, you don't want people to skip them, so that when they submit, you are able to get all the information that you require to serve those users, right? So you want to add validations to your form to make sure that every person that submits a form submits all the information that is necessary for that form to be submitted. Okay. So let's look at a simple example. Okay. So let's utilize email, just email, and then set email. Okay, so we can remove this and just put an empty string. Okay, so now for our handle submit, we'll definitely, so we're not going to use handle change for now. So let's just go ahead and, so let's use the handle change, okay? Just to make sure that we are following all the standard principles. I don't want to get you guys confused, except people want to see another method of utilizing handle change without actually creating a handle change function. Should I do that? Okay, all right, so I think, okay, curiosity, all right. So let's just be curious and work with that. So now, I remember that when we're doing handle, we had a handle change function before, right? So let's just take this out for now. Yeah, and then let's just work with the email input field, okay? So now basically what I'm going to do up here is create an error state, okay? So we want to have a state const, call it error, and then we say set error, and then we define that state, okay? So now we have our email, and then we have an error state, okay? So if we go down and utilize that error state, we can. So I think this is beginning to look a little bit too clustery. So let me remove some stuff. Okay. So we'll just have what we're working with. Good. Okay, so now what we have here is let me bring it down for visual to help us visually, okay? Are we together? I hope what I'm doing is not confusing. It's just basic. I'm just organizing the code base. So see how we can see things a little bit clearer. Okay. Good. So now we have our handle submit created, but we have not actually written any logic here, right? To handle our submit. So let's first of all work on our input field. So remember that we have changed this. We just want to access a value of email now. So it's no more form data, right? And then we want to use another method to handle our on-change, okay? So now what this is doing is exactly what that handle change function was doing initially, right? The only thing was that we pulled out our function and handled it somewhere and just passed that function to our on-change. But now we are writing the whole function, the full function inside our on-change handler, right? So what we are saying here is for this element, we want to set email, and we want to access the target, a value of this element, and set it to that email state. Okay, so this does exactly what we were doing when we created a handle submit here. So I think this is not what we're doing when we did handle submit. We had so set email, and for set email, we're passing the target value, okay? Are we following? Set. Sorry, so I need to remove. Good. So it's just set email. All right. So this is what we're doing in exactly we are doing now. The functions outside your JSX. Okay. So handle your functions separate and then just pass the function into your code as handle function, and then you trigger it. Okay. But this works perfectly, as you can see. So we have our name, email, value email, and then we have our on-change function written, right? Now, if we want to if we want to handle an error feature, now we want to add an error feature to make sure that when people do not add this email and they click on submit, we want to display this error. Okay, we can now go back up here and create our on submit rule. Okay, so for our on submit rule, we want to add a little if statement and say if email. So if there is email, or let's go a little bit in depth. So let's say if email contains at, as includes, okay, includes an at. So we want to look through the content that has been inputted for email. And if the content does not contain an at, that means that is not a valid email, correct? So we want to set an error to tell the user, please enter a valid email address. Now, this is standard validation. Okay. So if we come here, now, remember how the if statement works. You have one criteria. If it meets that criteria, display this. If it doesn't meet that criteria, okay, we want to do this. Okay. So now, if it doesn't meet this criteria, we want to say else. We want to say else. Okay. We want to say set error initially. First, set error to 0. So that means we want to say there is no error to be displayed. So just empty the error field, okay? And then if it is successful, we want to alert that our code has been submitted successfully. So we can say submitted email, okay, successfully. All right. Yes, and definitely we can clear the email input field, okay? So this is just standard stuff that we've already done. So we're just looking at it like we're trying to see how we can make a user know that, okay, we want you to put this in place. If not, you cannot submit this form, okay? Now, in this scenario now, remember that we have already defined our error state. We're already checking that this error state should show if this error is true. So we're saying all this should work if error is true. And this is where we want to display our error message, which we are already setting to state here. Okay? Now, if we save this and go here, so let's refresh this. And so if I put david.gmail.com, what we should get is a notification that says, please include an @ in the email address. david.gmail.com is missing an @. Okay, so basically what that just, that's like, this is a default, this is actually a default validation that happens with your input field. So we want to experience our own alert, right? So you remember that we did not actually set any alert to this. So let's put an alert and say, please enter a valid email, okay? So let's go back and work this out again. So we'll say david.gmail.com, okay? So if we submit this, so this is overriding, this alert is overriding the input field. So this is why this type, when you have the type of email, this input field already knows what an email is, right? So every time that input field is going to check to make sure that the email input is correct before it passes validation. That is a default validation that comes with the input field. But in real life, you will not be using that kind of validation. It's not even beautiful in the eyes, right? So now that I've removed the default validation, you can see now that our validation that we set can now be displayed. Please enter a valid email address, which is what we added here. Please enter a valid email address. Okay, so now we've customized our validation and we can now tell the user whatever we want to tell them because they did not input the @ Now, if we go ahead and input, you see that our error message still displays here. Please enter a valid email address, which is the error message we are setting to state here, and we are also displaying here. It shows as red under our input field. Now, if we come here and David at, and we say David@gmail.com and click on submit. You can see that submitted email, David at gmail.com successfully. Are we together? I need at least 5 people to confirm that we are working together. Yeah, so because I want to ask questions now. All right. So let's go ahead and hear from Rahim. So Rahim, just let us know the basic understanding that you have of validation, that especially with respect to what we have done with regards to email and error, and how we've set up everything regarding this with regards to this email and everything. Just give us like quick rundown. Okay, Rahim, you there? Surface rundown, just quick surface rundown of what we've handled with regards to form validation.
Okay, yeah. If I'm a bit right, because I joined the class at the midway, but nevertheless, the form validations is that when we are trying to create an input field, and the input field, we want to set an alert to handle if the input is in line with what we want to. So we use a set error functions, which we demonstrated with the email address field, where you set you use if else statement under the set errors to define the condition that if the email contained a specific character, it should use an alert and a set errors to display what's the actual what you want to perform. Else, then it should give us an error message. That's what I can pinpoint.
All right. That's actually sound. Thank you. So I just want to be sure that you guys are following, and you people are just writing yes in the text box to make me happy. Because if you are writing yes to make me happy, I'll be happy now, but you'll be sad later. Because this form validation is something that people are we might, if you don't understand it, we might have a lot of problems when it comes to promotional tax with regards to form validation, because I will not give you any grade, like even 1 mark, if you get, no matter how beautiful your form is, if it is not properly validated, I don't have business with that form. So I need everybody to understand form validation perfectly. Okay, so if there's anybody on this call that doesn't understand form validation, this is the moment where I would advise you to speak up and get clarity. Okay, nobody? We're all good. I love this class. Everybody is following. All right, cool. Let's
Hello,
go.
sir. My only question is,
Okay,
irregular expression.
sorry.
Whether we thought that.
Can you take that again? I
my
think
question. My only question is regular expression.
regular expression.
Only question is the regular expression, whether we be taught that, whether we use it.
So,
Trying to hear.
I don't understand your question. So Joshua is asking if I prefer default validation. I will return the question to you. What did you prefer? The custom validation I did that showed beautiful red text under our input field, or the validation that our component gave to us? Which one is better? Which one looked better?
Good question.
Yes, that's for Josh. So Joshua, so I guess that answers your question then. right? The more custom your validation is, the better your the user experience, in my own opinion. So now I come here and I put this and I remove this, and then I click on submit, and I'm seeing this on my UI. No matter how beautiful your site is, this has spoiled the whole, because like your site is not fine again, right? But if let's remove this, and then I do the same thing and submit, right? So let's remove that alert. I think the alert is not allowing people experience the beauty of this set error. So let's save this again, and then let's run this code again. So let me remove that at. So now if I submit this code, you see, we have a custom effect here that is showing what we're trying to achieve, right? So we're already telling the person, please, we need a valid email. And then as soon as I put a valid email, that validation disappears and it submits. As you can see, Excel, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Our question is, since we are removing the type, for the validation of password, if you remove the type, the password will be showing.
If you remove the type of password,
Yes, the password will not give us that dot sign. To show the plain text will show.
okay, so you're aware that you can customize all that because you've done HTML, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so when it comes to password, you can actually manipulate your input field because in essence, what you're trying to do is either display your content or not display your content. So if you are using the custom behavior of a password input field, right? Ideally, what happens in that case is that you can't even show that password. Can you show password in that kind of input field? Just a question. Go ahead, answer.
No.
Exactly. But in a proper application where you want somebody to be able to see the password that they've inputted, especially when they are having issues, right, trying to remember their password, you want to add like a function, a default function that helps them convert the ... to the actual password, correct?
Yes.
Exactly.
So
So you need to manipulate that input field, customize that input field enough to have a function that displays the password or doesn't display the password. Go ahead and research that. We're not going to look at that in this class, okay? Research that. When you make your findings, please express yourself in the Discord channel. Talk about it in the Discord channel. A lot of people would love to learn from what you would discover. Okay? Excel, are we good? Hello, Excel. Are we good?
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, Rahim, go ahead. Unmute.
Okay, yeah, thank you. In this our example, we make use of a single form example. Now, if you want to have a multiple form for validations, can we still be able to do that? And can we use an AND statement?
Yeah, so basically you
Can
can
you?
actually have different criteria for your if statement, right? So you have an if statement for this. You can have an if statement to validate another input field. So in essence, you can have if, then if else, then if else. I believe that's something that we should all have understanding of by now. Correct? Rahim, correct?
Yes, I
Good.
understand.
So you understand the concept of the if block. You can utilize an if block to have validation for 10 input fields, right? If you don't want to use a bogus if block, you can utilize okay. So I thought people order control flows, right? So you can utilize different control flows to handle your input validation, basically. Exactly. So for each case, you have a criteria for each case. And if all the cases pass, then that form can submit. But if all the cases do not pass, if at least one does not pass, it should not submit the form. So in essence, you just create your control flow to make sure that for each input field, it should pass the validation before that input field is good to go. And then you can actually add different error messages for each input field. So you can set error for each input field. So now, right now, I can set email error, name error, first name error, and all that, right? But basically, that's like really a lot of too much use states, right? So sometimes you might be thinking in that kind of scenario, if I want to use this kind of concept, I want to have one form data, like we did with form data. And then inside the form data, we have all the data that I'm expecting from that form. And then I can create an error state. And for that error state, I also create an object that has error for all the component for all the input fields that I'm expecting to use, right? Are we together?
Yeah, it's clear.
Exactly. So in that case now, I don't need to create use state for email, use state for name, use state for another for address, use state. I can create one use state, call it form data like we did earlier. Form data. Call it form data. And then inside form data, I can now create an array, an object, and then I have name, email, address, what have you, password, whatever I want to add to that particular form. Okay. And then I can do the same for my error state and have all these input fields represented in my error state. So that when I am assessing error, here, if it is email state that I'm assessing error, I want to display error.email. Okay. So in this error state now, I am assessing the error that I'm setting for email. And then within my if block, I will be assessing my if block based on form data.email. So I'm now saying if form data.email, includes this, we should set this error. Okay. Please enter a valid email address under the email part of my error state. And then if it is correct, it should submit. Okay. Remember that our error state now is an object, which is why I'm spreading it here to attach this error value to the email part of our error state. So when we have an error, it should display this red button, and this email issue should display under the email input field. Brian, are you clear?
So I'm clear. I'm clear. Thank you. I'm clear.
All right. Okay. Any other person, please? Any other question? Because we are pretty much done with today. Yeah, Abel, Abiola, rather, go ahead, please. Rahim, please, you can put your hands down.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening.
Okay, can we also have maybe a function that also maybe like a constant functions to validate the email, blah, 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 like that?
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by custom function. So what do you mean by custom function?
Like instead of having all this, if maybe creating a particular function that handles that separately,
That handles your if block.
then import it into it. Yes.
Yes, of course. So you can create a function that handles your if statement, that handles all your validation, and then you can pass your validation to your handle submit.
Mhm.
So in that case, now you're not saying for all my validation, like my validation function, if my validation function is successful, that is, it validates all my input fields, then go ahead and submit my form. But if it doesn't, you will still require to have a control block inside your handle submit. Okay. Now there are other methods of handling form validations, like when we are using Formic and we are using York to do our form validation. That's something, at least you guys can go ahead and read about that. Read about Formic and York, what you can do with Formic and York, so that when we get to that point in our training, when we start working with those libraries, right, it will be easy for you people to understand what we are doing. Okay, so you can look at that. These are like advanced methods of handling form validation. Using York, you can define all your form validations using York, and then pass those validations to your Formic on Summit, and then you can easily use that to either submit your form or not submit your form. Okay, but basically for now, this is what we are looking at, and you can just try and make sure you understand the concepts that we've taught so far and see how you can implement them. Please make sure to get your hands dirty. Create forms. You can create as many types of forms as possible. You can create forms with up to 200 input fields just to get a grasp of how this thing works. Use your console to submit, or submit it using an alert to see that, okay, this function actually works. Okay, I got this right. You know, those are like the little ways you can really become good at what we are trying to do here. Okay. It depends on you now. If you have the time and you want to see what it looks like, you can go ahead. I've seen forms that are really, really much. Yeah. So, well, I haven't seen a form with 200 input fields anyways, but you can be the first, Josh, to have that kind of form. Yeah. So, thank you guys for joining today's class. I believe it was productive and we all learned one or two things. Thank you to all of you for being cooperative and your inputs so far in the text chat. And Josh, yeah, thank you for paying so much attention to what also support me. All right. Have a nice night, everyone, and see you guys on Wednesday in our next class. Thank you guys. Bye.